Hey Bigfoot fans, I'm back. Just got back from a long weekend with some Bigfoot trackers. Man, those dudes are tough. They're tough. And they move fast, bushwhacking through mountains, and I had a hard time keeping up with them, but I made it. I got in and got out and got some great footage and interviews, and nobody does what these guys are doing. Nobody. So it should make for a great documentary, and over the next couple of months, I hope to get that edited and published on some venue. I don't know. These guys kind of harken back to the Patterson-Gimlin days. They're doing things like those guys did, but they're on foot. They're not on horseback. It's just really good stuff, and they impress me to no end. And I would love to just play a small part in sharing their story with you through this documentary. I think it's going to be awesome. All right, we got 3 stories tonight. They're all really good. We're going to cue them up now and let you hear them. All right, here we go. This encounter's from an individual who wants to stay completely anonymous and confidential, and I know why, so I won't even say his first name. But he writes, I'm not quite sure how to go about this. The only thing I can do is tell you of my experience. I believe that I had an encounter with a Bigfoot, although even to this day I'm still trying to figure out what I actually saw. The problem is, I was not the only one who saw it. Many others did too. So let me tell you the story, and your audience can decide. I've been a bailiff for many years. You know, the one who sits beside the judge in the courtroom. Many years I have sat there listening to many stories, now only to find out that my story is the strangest of all. I was on my way home one night, me and my wife. We were traveling in different cars, and it was at the end of my shift. It was approximately 6 and the weather was horrible. It was cold and raining, about as miserable condition that you can think of. I live in the small state of Delaware. I live at the southernmost end, so I was on my way home and I crossed my stoplight as I normally do. And then I noticed ahead of me my wife hits the brakes on her car. And then I noticed the other cars in line did the same thing. You may say to yourself, that's no big deal, a bunch of crazy drivers. Just then I looked to my right. I traveled this road so many times throughout the years. The pole that I have seen for at least 10 years now suddenly had a growth of vegetation beside it that went up the pole approximately 10 to 12 feet. I thought nothing of it, but something just told me something is not right. As I looked at it closer while driving in my truck, I saw a set of eyes. The skin surrounding the eyes looked weathered but human. It was extremely tall, very wide in the shoulder. The creature looked directly into my eyes. I did not have a sense of fear, but somehow it was like telling me, without speaking, that it was not there to hurt anybody. Almost like it was telling me to pay no attention to me, I'm just passing through. I did exactly that. I kept right on driving, but the law enforcement officer in my brain kicked in. I spun my truck around so I could get another look at this creature. It wasn't like I could do anything with it. This thing was massive, and I did not have any of my weapons on me. And even if I did, it gave me no reason to hurt it. The thing that worried me the most was I live in a very small rural area in Sussex County, Delaware. A lot of good old boys like to shoot at things that they don't understand. I'm not going to say all of them, but there are a few. When I turned around to look, it was gone. There was a pine tree thicket with a very large ditch cut through it. I could just barely make it out, but way down to the end it looked like something was moving at an incredible rate. I thought to myself, there's no need to even try. Whatever it was is gone now. Somehow I wanted to convince myself that I was just seeing things. No big deal. It was a lack of sleep or any other thing that I could put in there to help me rationalize what I saw. Suddenly my phone rang and it was my wife. Remember, she was the one in front of me along with 10 other cars. She said, "Did you see that?" I asked her, "What exactly did you see?" And she said, "It probably wasn't anything, but I saw something very large beside that pole." If I believed in such a thing, I would have sworn it was a Bigfoot. Of course, my wife is very pessimistic and doesn't believe in things like that. I laughed and said, "You never know. You need to keep an open mind." But there's a couple of things that struck me. I was surfing around on Facebook and other people were asking if anybody had seen something outside of Georgetown. I know this all sounds crazy and I'm still trying to rationalize it myself. I know what I saw and I don't believe in making things up at all. I spent many years as a bailiff and I don't have much time for people who make up lies. The story that I have just told you is the absolute truth. Believe it or not, when I go to my Maker, I will stand on that ground. I don't know what else to say. My story is not as interesting as others. The strangest part of this is it went through a little town at the farthest end of Delaware. Rather strange, but true. My wife and I are now divorced. We still talk and get along very well. Every now and then we talk about the event. You know, it's easy for people to just say, "You're crazy." But we both know what we saw, and we stand by it. So I hope you found my little story entertaining. May God bless you all. One thing I would like to remind everybody is that God made all the creatures. The devil may have made the evil ones, but I just don't believe that Bigfoot is in an evil category. I believe they just want to be left alone and live their lives like the rest of us do. Your story is not insignificant. It is very interesting. Not every encounter or sighting that people have has to be this in-your-face sort of confrontational thing. I think a lot of people just catch glimpses of these things and they don't really know what to make of it. And I'm so glad you sent it in because sometimes these little subtle encounters are very important because number one, you kind of get it off your chest, and on this channel, you're surrounded by viewers who are like, "Yeah, oh, cool." And you're also making a record of it, and it's out there, and it helps other people deal with their encounters like this. So thank you very much for sending this in, and no matter how insignificant you think your story is, please consider writing it down if you've had some kind of encounter because we are a Bigfoot-free zone. We don't rate stories. We don't give them grades. We don't follow up and investigate. If you have a story you want to share, email it to me, and soon you'll be able to put it on the website for everyone to read. So I wanted to thank this gentleman for sending the story in. I really appreciate it. I have an encounter I want you to hear now did you guys ever see the movie Willow Creek where the couple was camping and it's a fictional movie, but it's kind of set close to where the Patterson-Gimlin thing happened, and it's about a couple who goes camping and they're terrorized by Bigfoot, and this story kind of reminded me of that. The story is sent to me by Jordan, and he writes, "I've grown up as a Boy Scout camping as often as I could as a child and into my teen and adult years. I now often go up to Algonquin Park for canoe trips in the summer, sometimes going by myself for multiple day canoe trips if no one else wanted to come. I'm very comfortable and I've never felt scared being out in the wilderness. I've had bears come into campsites in the past and I've never been too bothered by it. I feel they're just large raccoons looking for an easy feed and not too much trouble. My wife and I had been together for a couple of years at that point. She wasn't my wife at the time. We had done several camping trips in the past together, but I wanted to do a backcountry canoe trip through Algonquin Park. It's a 7,500 square kilometer park, which is for the most part inaccessible because there's only one road that goes through it. There's no motorized boats, ATVs, or firearms allowed there. Because we put this trip together somewhat last minute, we decided that we would drive to the most northern part of the park where there's a canoe launch point. I figured there'd be no one up there because it's probably an extra 2 hours drive north of an already 5-hour drive. We were excited. It was our first backcountry camp together, and we were going for 4 days and 3 nights, plus we had our new dog. He was a 10-month-old border collie. He's a very smart dog. It was late July in 2013. My wife and I were both in our late 20s. Everything went amazing for the first 3 days and 2 nights, and we covered some ground. The dog settled in nicely to the new surroundings and was very comfortable being in a boat all day. On the third and final night, after canoeing for the better part of a day, we had picked a good place to camp for the night, somewhat of a blunt peninsula maybe 10 yards out into the lake. The lake was no more than 2 miles long by 3/4 of a mile across. It was dead calm that evening as we cooked over the campfire. We couldn't help but notice just how quiet it was. Really quiet, like you can hear a twig break on the other side of the lake. The water was like glass. We eventually packed up the food, and with the fire still smoldering, we made our way into the tent. Maybe 15 minutes after being in the tent, we heard what I would describe as a large branch or tree breaking with a loud crack. Kind of like a tree broke at the trunk and was going to fall, but we never heard a thud of it hitting the ground, just the noise of it breaking. My wife was a bit startled, and I reassured her trees fall down in the woods all the time. We started to settle back down, and then we heard what I would only describe as a very loud call. A scream, if you will, extremely loud, but it seemed a bit far away. It was deep and throaty, and not a sound that I had ever heard before in the woods. My wife was frightened and asked me what it was, and I quickly said it was a moose. She was still startled and definitely scared, but we lay there quietly, and eventually we fell asleep. I woke up first, and I was just laying there not sure what woke me, but not too long after that, I heard a giant splash of a rock being thrown in the lake. It was big, it was loud, and the only way I could explain it, to work it in my head, is we must be close to some sort of cliff face of sorts, and a boulder must have fallen off the edge. My wife had heard it as well, even though she sleeps with earplugs in. She was up at this point, laying in bed, both of us on our back with our eyes open. Our dog was up and dead quiet. He was sitting at the front door of the tent like he was looking out. Then shortly after that, crack, something hit the tent. I would estimate it to be a rock about a 1 inch in diameter. Hits the side of the tent, and I didn't think much of it. Probably a tree branch or an acorn falling from an oak tree. Then another rock hits the side of the tent. Then, 10 or 15 seconds later, crack, something else would hit the tent. It was very calm and quiet outside. Very still. I remember smelling what I thought at the time was a skunk, but I don't think they're very common in that area, and I wouldn't even say it smelled exactly like a skunk. It was kind of a putrid odor. I kept telling myself that it's just acorns falling from the tree hitting the tent, and I told my wife the same thing. But I'll tell you, there was a pure fear pumping through my veins. I was actually terrified. I kept trying to tell myself that there was a logical explanation for these sounds and these events. What I was trying to tell myself were acorns hitting the tent, but I knew damn well it was a rock being thrown. This happened about 15 times. I gave up on the idea that it was acorns hitting the tent as I sat there paralyzed in fear. I thought maybe there's some sort of hiking trail through the woods close in that area, and some hikers thought it would be fun to play a joke on me by throwing rocks at the tent. But there's no one around, or at least I couldn't hear anything. The rocks hitting the tent stopped, and I didn't hear anything for a while. Eventually I got out of the tent and went outside to take a look around, and to my surprise there was no oak tree dropping acorns above us, and that steep rock face that I was sure the boulder came from the night before didn't exist. Behind our tent going into the woods was incredibly thick brush, not something someone would hike through. We packed up that morning and got in the canoe, and before I knew it we were in the car driving home. We didn't say much driving home. I just kept thinking about what had happened earlier that morning. When I got home, I got on YouTube and looked up moose calls and bear calls and what a beaver sounds like when it slaps its tail onto the water. Sure enough, that's definitely not what I heard. It wasn't until years later I stumbled across this whole Sasquatch thing, which before then I had thought was just some made-up thing like the Loch Ness Monster. You know, something that makes a great story. Well, it's been 5 years and we haven't gone back to Algonquin backcountry camping. I'm sure the reason is because deep down I'm a little bit scared. I am still looking for closure as to why these things happened. Should I have felt threatened? Or was I just a curiosity? I don't know. One last thing. After hearing the recordings of a Sasquatch howling in the woods on the internet, that is definitely what we heard. Thanks, Jordan, for sending that in. Did you guys kind of compare that with the Willow Creek story? I thought it was kind of similar. You know, a couple out camping, no one around for miles, and all of a sudden something starts harassing them. But obviously they weren't aggressive and they weren't there to hurt you. They were probably just messing with you. A lot of people say that campers are like Bigfoot TV. You know, they sit back in the woods and watch you and mess with you and look at your reaction and probably laugh at each other for pulling these stunts. And that could be true. And, you know, there are very few attacks attributed to Bigfoot in this manner. So I know you're trying to get closure on it, Jordan, and I hope you do. And I hope you go back to Algonquin and do some canoe trips, man. I think you'll be all right. I just don't think these things are really that dangerous. Appreciate you, buddy, for sending that in. This is an encounter sent to me by Scott, and it's pretty good. He's a bow hunter, and he talks about a encounter as a bow hunter. It's kind of scary. He writes, this account takes place in late October of 1984. I was bow hunting on my grandparents' farm in Spencer County, Indiana. The farm is very close to the Lincoln Boyhood National Memorial, the location where Abraham Lincoln was a teenager. It was an early Sunday morning. The temperature was cool but not cold. There was no frost. I make it a habit to enter the woods early, but this day I got a late start. I want to get to the area, settle down before shooting light. I had already set my portable deer stand the week before in a red oak tree. There was a deer trail going through the old logging road from my right to my left. I creeped into the woods as quietly as possible. I got to the stand and began to climb the tree. My stand made noise as I climbed. It couldn't be avoided. It was a design flaw. It was really loud, and I knew everything in the woods could hear me. Light was beginning to show on the eastern horizon. I hadn't been settled in for more than 20 minutes when I heard a loud noise down the hill to my front about 100 yards away. I heard a sound that reminded me of something coming out of a tree. It was very similar to the sound of a raccoon makes when it comes out of a tree with the scratching and breaking tree bark, but much louder. My first thought was another hunter, but there was not a metallic sound I would associate with climbing a deer stand and descending a tree. This was private property which was jealously guarded against trespassers. I heard something impact the ground, and then it started walking towards my position. It made a lot of noise, leaves rustling and branches and sticks breaking. Most of the leaves were off the trees by this time, and I was wondering why I didn't see a light. This was a heavily wooded area, and no one would be able to navigate their way through there without some source of illumination. It kept walking directly towards my position, and at about 40 yards, I could hear heavy breathing as well as breaking branches and leaves. Still, no light was to be seen. I was beginning to transition from curiosity to fear. Though it was illegal at the time, I carried a handgun while I bow hunted. I drew the weapon. I held the pistol in my right hand and the flashlight in my left. It kept coming towards me. The breaking of branches had stopped, but the heavy breathing continued. Though it was a moonless night, my eyes had somewhat adjusted. I could now make out a vertical form that now entered the deer trail. It was not a man. It was about 6.5 to 7 feet tall, but what was amazing about the form was the immense bulk. It had the bulk of a refrigerator. This thing was huge. It was covered with very long hair. It looked up at me and let out a loud sigh, kind of like, well, crap. It was not happy with me being there. I kept the .45 leveled at it the whole time, but I never turned on the light. Therefore, I didn't get a clear look at its face. I regret that to this day, but that may have saved my life. I love my .45, but let's face it, it wasn't enough gun. It looked at me for 15 seconds or so, and then started up the ridge on approximately the same path I took to get to the stand. When it got directly to my left, the breeze brought its scent to my nose. It was horrendous. It reminded me of cleaning out a hog barn in the summer. It continued to walk over the ridge behind me, making noise with rustling leaves, breaking branches, and heavy breathing. Finally, I couldn't hear it anymore. As soon as there was more light, I got out of the tree and left the woods quickly by a different route that I had used in the morning. I got to my car and retrieved a Ruger Mini 14 that I carried. I was initially going to look for any sign of the creature, but thought the better of it. What really throws me off all these years later is the very long hair. I knew it was a Bigfoot, but the hair was so long. It was nothing like the Patterson film creature. I went along with my life. I bought my own farm in Kentucky. I still hunted and managed my property for wildlife. My son thought I was paranoid because I was always heavily armed in the woods, and I even made him carry a weapon. But he wasn't there the day that I saw this monster. My son got me started listening to a podcast, and I caught the Bigfoot Outlaws show. The hosts were explaining the different types of Bigfoot, and they referenced the book Them and Us. There were pictures posted. There it was, the creature that I had seen. I wasn't crazy. It was a Type 2, which is prominent in the southern United States, and the mystery was solved. I had never encountered anything else in the intervening 34 years to make me think of Bigfoot until the last several weeks of 2018. On Sunday, December 2nd, I was deer scouting. I got back to my truck after dark and was looking at the stars. It was very peaceful. I was in a creek bottom between two large ridges. On the ridge to the east, I heard a large canine howl. There are no houses in that area, so I'm pretty sure it wasn't a dog. I've heard that type of howl over there before, probably a coy wolf or some coyote mix. We have these animals in the area. It was approximately a half a mile away. Immediately, it was answered by a very strange vocalization to its south on the same ridge. It definitely wasn't canine. It was approximately 3/4 of a mile from my location. It only vocalized for about 20 seconds or so. I've never heard a sound like that before, half howl and half scream. I went to the truck and fetched my 12-gauge riot gun, and then I left for home about 15 minutes later. The next Sunday evening, I was hunting in the evening and skipped on a couple of does. I got to the truck after dark and listened for a while. I wanted to see what I could hear. It was overcast, so no stargazing. After a little while, I heard a whistle coming from a pine thicket to the south. It was about 80 yards away. I gripped my 12-gauge tight. I whistled to it, and after 10 or 15 seconds, it whistled back to me. This went on for 5 or 6 times over the next 10 minutes. The notes went up and down in the scale, and it mimicked by my notes roughly. After this exchange, I forced myself to stick around another 30 minutes, just to show it I wasn't scared. The next Sunday, I hunted in the evening. After dark, I was back at the truck and listening. I kept hearing movement off to the west, about 75 yards away. I was sitting on the tailgate of the truck. After a while, I heard something near the front of the truck. I walked around to the front and something large bolted away. I switched on a headlamp I was wearing and lifted the shotgun, but I saw nothing. I decided to leave right then. I wondered what was going on. I have owned the property for 12 years and spent several nights in the woods, and I heard nothing or have seen nothing. The farmer who is my neighbor has told me that he has heard strange sounds at night, but he refuses to elaborate. I really hope it's not the hairy guy who's moved in. Once seeing him is enough. Scott, I think you know what you got, brother. But you've been in the woods a lot and they're not bothering you. Maybe they're just kind of checking you out. And maybe they know you belong there and they're not going to mess with you. I don't know. But that's a very good story. This is a man who's had several encounters, one full visual, and then on his own property he has several incidental incidents. And I think you know what you've got there, brother. The Type 2, like the Outlaws told you, it's the Type 2 prominent in the southern United States. Wish you the best, and hope you kill some deer this year, man. Thanks for sending that in. Okay, that's 3 really great encounter stories, and thank you again so much, guys, for sending those in. I've still got a huge pile, and every time I whittle it down, more people send in encounters, and it just gets thicker and thicker. And I'm getting through these as quick as I can. So you guys hang tough with me. But one good thing about it is we've got stories for days that are so interesting and good. And I look forward to doing them all. Okay, we'll see you guys on the next video. Thank you so much.